Section 28 of Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, by Francis E. W. Harper. Chapter 28. Dr. Latrobe's Mistake. On the morning previous to their departure for their respective homes, Dr. Gresham met Dr. Latrobe in the parlor of the Concordia. "How," asked Dr. Gresham, "did you like Dr. Latimer's paper?" "Very much indeed. It was excellent. He is a very talented young man. He sits next to me at lunch, and I have conversed with him several times. He is very genial and attractive, only he seems to be rather cranky on the Negro question. I hope, if he comes South, that he will not make the mistake of mixing up with the Negroes. It would be throwing away his influence and ruining his prospects. He seems to be well versed in science and literature, and would make a very delightful accession to our social life." "I think," replied Dr. Gresham, "that he is an honor to our profession. He is one of the finest specimens of our young manhood." Just then Dr. Latimer entered the room. Dr. Latrobe arose, and, greeting him cordially, said, "I was delighted with your paper. It was full of thought and suggestion." "Thank you," answered Dr. Latimer. "It was my aim to make it so." "And you succeeded admirably," replied Dr. Latrobe. "I could not help thinking how much we owe to heredity and environment." "Yes," said Dr. Gresham. "Continental Europe yearly sends to our shores subjects to be developed into citizens. Emancipation has given us millions of new citizens, and to them our influence and example should be a blessing and not a curse." "Well," said Dr. Latimer, "I intend to go South and help those who so much need helpers from their own ranks." "I hope," answered Dr. Latrobe, "that if you go South you will only sustain business relations with the Negroes, and not commit the folly of equalizing yourself with them." "Why not?" asked Dr. Latimer, steadily looking him in the eye. "Because in equalizing yourself with them you drag us down, and our social customs must be kept intact. You have been associating with me at the convention for several days. I do not see that the contact has dragged you down, has it?" "You! What has that got to do with associating with niggers?" asked Dr. Latrobe curtly. "The blood of that race is coursing through my veins. I am one of them," replied Dr. Latimer, proudly raising his head. "You!" exclaimed Dr. Latrobe, with an air of profound astonishment and crimsoning face. "Yes," interposed Dr. Gresham, laughing heartily at Dr. Latrobe's discomfiture. "He belongs to that Negro race both by blood and choice. His father's mother made overtures to receive him as her grandson and heir, but he has nobly refused to forsake his mother's people, and has cast his lot with them." "And I," said Dr. Latimer, "would have despised myself if I had done otherwise." "Well, well," said Dr. Latrobe, rising, "I was never so deceived before. Good morning." Dr. Latrobe had thought he was clear-sighted enough to detect the presence of Negro blood when all physical traces had disappeared, but he had associated with Dr. Latimer for several days and admired his talent without suspecting for one moment his racial connection. He could not help feeling a sense of vexation at the signal mistake he had made. Dr. Frank Latimer was the natural grandson of a Southern lady in whose family his mother had been a slave. The blood of a proud aristocratic ancestry was flowing through his veins, and generations of blood admixture had effaced all trace of his Negro lineage. His complexion was blond, his eye bright and piercing, his lips firm and well moulded, his manner very affable, his intellect active and well stored with information. He was a man capable of winning in life through his rich gifts of inheritance and acquirements. When freedom came, his mother, like Hagar of old, went out into the wide world to seek a living for herself and child. Through years of poverty she labored to educate her child, and saw the glad fruition of her hopes when her son graduated as an M.D. from the University of P. After his graduation he met his father's mother, who recognized him by his resemblance to her dear departed son. All the mother love in her lonely heart awoke, and she was willing to overlook the missing link of matrimony, and adopt him as her heir, if he would ignore his identity with the colored race. Before him loomed all the possibilities which only birth and blood can give a white man in our democratic country. But he was a man of too much sterling worth of character to be willing to forsake his mother's race for the richest advantages his grandmother could bestow. Dr. Gresham had met Dr. Latimer at the beginning of the convention, and had been attracted to him by his frank and genial manner. One morning, when conversing with him, Dr. Gresham had learned some of the salient points of his history, which, instead of repelling him, had only deepened his admiration for the young doctor. He was much amused when he saw the pleasant acquaintanceship between him and Dr. Latrobe, but they agreed to be silent about his racial connection until the time came when they were ready to divulge it, and they were hugely delighted at his signal blunder. End of section 28. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Section 29 of Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, by Francis E. W. Harper. Chapter 29. Visitors from the South. "Mama is not well," said Iola to Robert. "I spoke to her about sending for a doctor, but she objected, and I did not insist. I will ask Dr. Latimer, whom I met at the Concordia, to step in. He is a splendid young fellow. I wish we had thousands like him." In the evening the doctor called. Without appearing to make a professional visit, he engaged Marie in conversation, watched her carefully, and came to the conclusion that her failing health proceeded more from mental than physical causes. "I am so uneasy about Harry," said Mrs. Leroy. "He is so fearless and outspoken. I do wish the attention of the whole nation could be turned to the cruel barbarisms which are a national disgrace. I think the term 'bloody shirt' is one of the most heartless phrases ever invented to divert attention from cruel wrongs and dreadful outrages." Just then Iola came in and was introduced by her uncle to Dr. Latimer, to whom the introduction was a sudden and unexpected pleasure. After an interchange of courtesies, Marie resumed the conversation, saying, "Harry wrote me only last week that a young friend of his had lost his situation because he refused to have his pupils strew flowers on the streets through which Jefferson Davis was to pass." "I think," said Dr. Latimer indignantly, "that the Israelites had just as much right to scatter flowers over the bodies of the Egyptians when the waves threw back their corpses on the shores of the Red Sea, as these children had to strew the path of Jefferson Davis with flowers. We want our boys to grow up manly citizens, and not cringing sycophants. When do you expect your son, Mrs. Leroy?" "Sometime next week," answered Marie. "And his presence will do you more good than all the medicine in my chest. I hope, doctor," said Mrs. Leroy, "that we will not lose sight of you, now that your professional visit is ended. For I believe your visit was the result of a conspiracy between Iola and her uncle." Dr. Latimer laughed as he answered, "Ah, Mrs. Leroy, I see you have found us all out." "Oh, doctor," exclaimed Iola, with pleasing excitement, "there is a young lady coming here to visit me next week. Her name is Miss Lucille Delany, and she is my ideal woman. She is grand, brave, intellectual, and religious." "Is that so? She would make some man an excellent wife," replied Dr. Latimer. "Now isn't that perfectly manlike?" answered Iola, smiling. "Mamma, what do you think of that? Did any of you gentlemen ever see a young woman of much ability that you did not look upon as a flotsam, all adrift until some man had appropriated her? I think, Miss Leroy, that the world's work, if shared, is better done than when it is performed alone. Don't you think your life work will be better done if some one shares it with you?" asked Dr. Latimer slowly, and with a smile in his eyes. "That would depend on the person who shared it," said Iola, faintly blushing. Here said Robert, a few evenings after this conversation, as he handed Iola a couple of letters, "is something which will please you." Iola took the letters, and after reading one of them, said, "Miss Delany and Harry will be here on Wednesday, and this one is an invitation which also adds to my enjoyment." "What is it?" asked Marie. "An invitation to a hop or a German?" "No, but something which I value far more. We are all invited to Mr. Stillman's to a conversazione." "What is the object?" "His object is to gather some of the thinkers and leaders of the race to consult on subjects of vital interest to our welfare. He has invited Dr. Latimer, Professor Gradner of North Carolina, Mr. Forrest of New York, Hon. Dugdale, Reverends Carmichael, Cantner, Tunster, Professor Langhorne of Georgia, and a few ladies, Mrs. Watson, Miss Brown, and others." "I am glad that it is neither a hop nor a German," said Iola, "but something for which I have been longing." "Why, Iola," asked Robert, "don't you believe in young people having a good time?" "Oh, yes," answered Iola, seriously. "I believe in young people having amusements and recreations, but the times are too serious for us to attempt to make our lives a long holiday." "Well, Iola," answered Robert, "this is the first holiday we have had in 250 years, and you shouldn't be too exacting." "Yes," replied Marie, "human beings naturally crave enjoyment, and if not furnished with good amusements, they are apt to gravitate to low pleasures." "Some one," said Robert, "has said that the Indian belongs to an old race and looks gloomily back to the past, and that the Negro belongs to a young race and looks hopefully towards the future." "If that be so," replied Marie, "our race life corresponds more to the follies of youth than the faults of maturer years." On Dr. Latimer's next visit he was much pleased to see a great change in Marie's appearance. Her eye had grown brighter, her step more elastic, and the anxiety had faded from her face. Harry had arrived, and with him came Miss Delany. "Good evening, Dr. Latimer," said Iola, cheerfully, as she entered the room with Miss Lucille Delany. "This is my friend, Miss Delany, from Georgia. Were she not present, I would say she is one of the grandest women in America." "I am very much pleased to meet you," said Dr. Latimer, cordially. "I have heard Miss Leroy speak of you. We were expecting you," he added, with a smile. Just then Harry entered the room, and Iola presented him to Dr. Latimer, saying, "This is my brother, about whom mamma was so anxious." "Had you a pleasant journey?" asked Dr. Latimer, after the first greetings were over. "Not especially," answered Miss Delany. "Southern roads are not always very pleasant to travel. When Mr. Leroy entered the cars at A, where he was known, had he taken his seat among the white people he would have been remanded to the colored." "But after a while," said Harry, "as Miss Delany and myself were sitting together, laughing and chatting, a colored man entered the car, and, mistaking me for a white man, asked the conductor to have me removed, and I had to insist that I was colored in order to be permitted to remain. It would be ludicrous, if it were not vexatious, to be too white to be black, and too black to be white." "Caste plays such fantastic tricks in this country," said Dr. Latimer. "I tell Mr. Leroy," said Miss Delany, "that when he returns he must put a label on himself saying, 'I am a colored man,' to prevent annoyance." Section 29. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Section 30 of Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, by Francis E. W. Harper. Chapter 30. Friends in Council. On the following Friday evening, Mr. Stillman's pleasant, spacious parlors were filled to overflowing with a select company of earnest men and women deeply interested in the welfare of the race. Bishop Tunster had prepared a paper on Negro immigration. Dr. Latimer opened the discussion by speaking favorably of some of the salient points, but said, I do not believe self-exilement is the true remedy for the wrongs of the Negro. Where should he go if he left this country? Go to Africa, replied Bishop Tunster in his bluff, hearty tones. I believe that Africa is to be redeemed to civilization, and that the Negro is to be gathered into the family of nations and recognized as a man and a brother. Go to Africa? Repeated Professor Langhorne of Georgia. Does the United States own 1 foot of African soil? And have we not been investing our blood in the country for ages? I am in favor of missionary efforts, said Professor Gradner of North Carolina, for the redemption of Africa, but I see no reason for expatriating ourselves because some persons do not admire the color of our skins. I do not believe, said Mr. Stillman, in emptying on the shores of Africa a horde of ignorant, poverty-stricken people as missionaries of civilization or Christianity. And while I am in favor of missionary efforts, there is need here for the best heart and brain to work in unison for justice and righteousness. America, said Miss Delany, is the best field for human development. God has not heaped up our mountains with such grandeur, flooded our rivers with such majesty, crowned our valleys with such fertility, enriched our mines with such wealth, that they should only minister to grasping greed and sensuous enjoyment. Climate, soil, and physical environment, said Professor Gradner, have much to do with shaping national characteristics. If in Africa, under a tropical sun, the Negro has lagged behind other races in the march of civilization, at least for once in his history he has in this country the privilege of using climatic advantages and developing under new conditions. Yes, replied Dr. Latimer, and I do not wish our people to become restless and unsettled before they have tried 1 generation of freedom. I am always glad, said Mr. Forrest, a tall, distinguished-looking gentleman from New York, when I hear of people who are ill-treated in one section of the country emigrating to another. Men who are deaf to the claims of mercy and oblivious to the demands of justice can feel when money is slipping from their pockets. The Negro, said Hon. Dugdale, does not present to my mind the picture of an effete and exhausted people destined to die out before a stronger race. Gilbert Haven once saw a statue which suggested this thought: I am black, but comely. The sun has looked down upon me, but I will teach you who despise me to feel that I am your superior. The men who are acquiring property and building up homes in the South show us what energy and determination may do, even in that part of the country. I believe such men can do more to conquer prejudice than if they spend all their lives in shouting for their rights and ignoring their duties. No. As there are millions of us in this country, I think it is best to settle down and work out our own salvation here. How many of us today, asked Professor Langhorne, would be teaching in the South if every field of labor in the North was as accessible to us as to the whites? It has been estimated that 1 million young white men have left the South since the war, and had our chances been equal to theirs, would we have been any more willing to stay in the South with those who need us than they? But this prejudice, by impacting us together, gives us a common cause and brings our intellect in contact with the less favored of our race. I do not believe, said Miss Delany, that the Southern white people themselves desire any wholesale exodus of the colored from their labor fields. It would be suicidal to attempt their expatriation. History, said Professor Langhorne, tells that Spain was once the place where barbarian Europe came to light her lamp. 700 years before there was a public lamp in London, you might have gone through the streets of Cordova amid 10 miles of lighted lamps and stood there on solidly paved land, when hundreds of years afterwards, in Paris, on a rainy day, you would have sunk to your ankles in the mud. But she who bore the name of the terror of nations and the queen of the ocean was not strong enough to dash herself against God's law of retribution and escape unscathed. She inaugurated a crusade of horror against 1 million of her best laborers and artisans. Vainly she expected the blessing of God to crown her work of violence. Instead of seeing the fruition of her hopes in the increased prosperity of her land, depression and paralysis settled on her trade and business. A fearful blow was struck at her agriculture. Decay settled on her manufactories. Money became too scarce to pay the necessary expenses of the king's exchequer. And that once mighty empire became a fallen kingdom, pierced by her crimes and dragged down by her transgressions. We did not, said Iola, place the bounds of our habitation, and I believe we are to be fixtures in this country. But beyond the shadows, I see the coruscation of a brighter day, and we can help usher it in, not by answering hate with hate, or giving scorn for scorn, but by striving to be more generous, noble, and just. It seems as if all creation travels to respond to the song of the herald angels, peace on earth, goodwill toward men. The next paper was on Patriotism, by Reverend Cantner. It was a paper in which the white man was extolled as the master race, and spoke as if it were a privilege for the colored man to be linked to his destiny and to live beneath the shadow of his power. He asserted that the white race of this country is the broadest, most Christian, and humane of that branch of the human family. Dr. Latimer took exception to his position. Law, he said, is the pivot on which the whole universe turns, and obedience to law is the gauge by which a nation's strength or weakness is tried. We have had two evils by which our obedience to law has been tested, slavery and the liquor traffic. How have we dealt with them both? We have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Millions of slaves and serfs have been liberated during this century, but not even in semi-barbaric Russia, heathen Japan, or Catholic Spain has slavery been abolished through such a fearful conflict as it was in the United States. The liquor traffic still sends its floods of ruin and shame to the habitations of men, and no political party has been found with enough moral power and numerical strength to stay the tide of death. I think, said Professor Gradner, that what our country needs is truth more than flattery. I do not think that our moral life keeps pace with our mental development and material progress. I know of no civilized country on the globe, Catholic, Protestant, or Mohammedan, where life is less secure than it is in the South. Nearly 1,800 years ago the life of a Roman citizen in Palestine was in danger from mob violence. That pagan government threw around him a wall of living clay, consisting of 470 men, when more than 40 Jews had bound themselves with an oath that they would neither eat nor drink until they had taken the life of the Apostle Paul. Does not true patriotism demand that citizenship should be as much protected in Christian America as it was in heathen Rome? I would have our people, said Miss Delany, more interested in politics. Instead of forgetting the past, I would have them hold in everlasting remembrance our great deliverance. Hitherto we have never had a country with tender, precious memories to fill our eyes with tears, or glad reminiscences to thrill our hearts with pride and joy. We have been aliens and outcasts in the land of our birth. But I want my pupils to do all in their power to make this country worthy of their deepest devotion and loftiest patriotism. I want them to feel that its glory is their glory, its dishonor their shame. Our esteemed friend, Mrs. Watson, said Iola, sends regrets that she cannot come, but has kindly favored us with a poem called The Rallying Cry. In her letter she says that although she is no longer young, she feels that in the conflict for the right there's room for young as well as old. She hopes that we will here unite the enthusiasm of youth with the experience of age, and that we will have a pleasant and profitable conference. Is it your pleasure that the poem be read at this stage of our proceedings, or later on? Let us have it now, answered Harry, and I move that Miss Delany be chosen to lend to the poem the charm of her voice. I second the motion, said Iola, smiling and handing the poem to Miss Delany. Miss Delany took the poem and read it with fine effect. The spirit of the poem had entered her soul. A Rallying Cry. O children of the tropics, amid our pain and wrong, have you no other mission than music, dance, and song? When through the weary ages our dripping tears still fall, Is this a time to dally with pleasure's silken thrall? Go, muffle all your viols. As heroes learn to stand, with faith in God's great justice, nerve every heart and hand. Dream not of ease nor pleasure, nor honor, wealth, nor fame, till from the dust you've lifted our long dishonored name. And crown that name with glory by deeds of holy worth, to shine with light emblazoned, the noblest name on earth. Count life a dismal failure, unblessing and unblessed, that seeks amid ease inglorious for pleasure or for rest. With courage, strength, and valor your lives and actions brace. Shrink not from toil or hardship, and dangers bravely face. Engrave upon your banners, in words of golden light, that honor, truth, and justice are more than godless might. Above earth's pain and sorrow, Christ's dying face I see. I hear the cry of anguish, why hast thou forsaken me? In the pallor of that anguish I see the only light, to flood with peace and gladness earth's sorrow, pain, and night. Arrayed in Christly armor, against error, crime, and sin, the victory can't be doubtful, for God is sure to win. The next paper was by Miss Iola Leroy on the education of mothers. I agree, said Reverend Eustace of St. Mary's Parish, with the paper. The great need of the race is enlightened mothers. And enlightened fathers, too, added Miss Delany quickly. If there is anything I chafe to see, it is a strong, hearty man shirking his burdens, putting them on the shoulders of his wife, and taking life easy for himself. I always pity such mothers, interposed Iola tenderly. I think, said Miss Delany, with a flash in her eye and a ring of decision in her voice, that such men ought to be drummed out of town. As she spoke, there was an expression which seemed to say, and I would like to help do it. Harry smiled and gave her a quick glance of admiration. I do not think, said Mrs. Stillman, that we can begin too early to teach our boys to be manly and self-respecting, and our girls to be useful and self-reliant. You know, said Mrs. Leroy, that after the war we were thrown upon the nation a homeless race to be gathered into homes, and a legally unmarried race to be taught the sacredness of the marriage relation. We must instill into our young people that the true strength of a race means purity in women and uprightness in men. Who can say with Sir Galahad, my strength is the strength of 10, because my heart is pure? And where this is wanting, neither wealth nor culture can make up the deficiency. There is a field of Christian endeavor which lies between the schoolhouse and the pulpit, which needs the hand of a woman more in private than in public, said Miss Delany. Yes, I have often felt the need of such work in my own parish. We need a union of women with the warmest hearts and clearest brains to help in the moral education of the race, said Reverend Eustace. Yes, said Iola, if we would have the prisons empty, we must make the homes more attractive. In civilized society, replied Dr. Latimer, there must be restraint either within or without. If parents fail to teach restraint within, society has her check reins without in the form of chain gangs, prisons, and the gallows. The closing paper was on the moral progress of the race, by Hon. Dugdale. He said, the moral progress of the race was not all he could desire, yet he could not help feeling that, compared with other races, the outlook was not hopeless. I am so sorry to see, however, that in some states there is an undue proportion of colored people in prisons. I think, answered Professor Langhorne of Georgia, that this is owing to a partial administration of law in meting out punishment to colored offenders. I know red-handed murderers who walk in this republic unwhipped of justice, and I have seen a colored woman sentenced to prison for weeks for stealing 25 cents. I knew a colored girl who was executed for murder when only a child in years, and it was through the intervention of a friend of mine, one of the bravest young men of the South, that a boy of 15 was saved from the gallows. When I look, said Mr. Forrest, at the slow growth of modern civilization, the ages which have been consumed in reaching our present altitude, and see how we have outgrown slavery, feudalism, and religious persecutions, I can not despair of the future of the race." "Just now," said Dr. Latimer, "we have the fearful grinding and friction which comes in the course of an adjustment of the new machinery of freedom in the old ruts of slavery. But I am optimistic enough to believe that there will yet be a far higher and better Christian civilization than our country has ever known." "And in that civilization I believe the Negro is to be an important factor," said Reverend Cantnor. "I believe it also," said Miss Delany hopefully, "and this thought has been a blessed inspiration to my life. When I come in contact with Christless prejudices, I feel that my life is too much a part of the divine plan, and invested with too much intrinsic worth for me to be the least humiliated by indignities that beggarly souls can inflict. I feel more pitiful than resentful to those who do not know how much they miss by living mean, ignoble lives." "My heart," said Iola, "is full of hope for the future. Pain and suffering are the crucibles out of which come gold more fine than the pavements of heaven, and gems more precious than the foundations of the holy city." "If," said Mrs. Leroy, "pain and suffering are factors in human development, surely we have not been counted too worthless to suffer." "And is there," continued Iola, "a path which we have trodden in this country, unless it be the path of sin, into which Jesus Christ has not put his feet and left it luminous with the light of his steps? Has the Negro been poor and homeless? The birds of the air had nests and foxes had holes, but the Son of Man had not where to lay his head. Has our name been a synonym for contempt? He shall be called a Nazarene. Have we been despised and trodden under foot? Christ was despised and rejected of men. Have we been ignorant and unlearned? It was said of Jesus Christ, 'How knoweth this man letters, never having learned?' Have we been beaten and bruised in the prison house of bondage? They took Jesus and scourged him. Have we been slaughtered, our bones scattered at the grave's mouth? He was spit upon by the mob, smitten and mocked by the rabble, and died as died Rome's meanest criminal slave. Today that cross of shame is a throne of power, those robes of scorn have changed to habiliments of light, and that crown of mockery to a diadem of glory. And never, while the agony of Gethsemane and the sufferings of Calvary have their hold upon my heart, will I recognize any religion as his which despises the least of his brethren." As Iola finished, there was a ring of triumph in her voice, as if she were reviewing a path she had trodden with bleeding feet, and seen it change to lines of living light. Her soul seemed to be flashing through the rare loveliness of her face and etherealizing its beauty. Every one was spellbound. Dr. Latimer was entranced, and turning to Hon. Dugdale, said in a low voice and with deep drawn breath, "She is angelic." Hon. Dugdale turned, gave a questioning look, then replied, "She is strangely beautiful. Do you know her?" "Yes, I have met her several times. I accompanied her here to night. The tones of her voice are like benedictions of peace. Her words a call to higher service and nobler life." Just then Reverend Carmicle was announced. He had been on a Southern tour and had just returned. "Oh, Doctor," exclaimed Mrs. Stillman, "I am delighted to see you. We were about to adjourn, but we will postpone action to hear from you." "Thank you," replied Reverend Carmicle. "I have not the cue to the meeting, and will listen while I take breath." "Pardon me," answered Mrs. Stillman. "I should have been more thoughtful than to press so welcome a guest into service before I had given him time for rest and refreshment. But if the courtesy failed on my lips, it did not fail in my heart. I wanted our young folks to see one of our thinkers who had won distinction before the war." "My dear friend," said Reverend Carmicle, smiling, "some of these young folks will look on me as a back number. You know the cry has already gone forth, 'Young men to the front.'" "But we need old men for counsel," interposed Mr. Forrest of New York. Of course, said Reverend Carmichael, we older men would rather retire gracefully than be relegated or hustled to a back seat. But I am pleased to see doors open to you which were closed to us, and opportunities which were denied us embraced by you. How, asked Hon. Dugdale, do you feel in reference to our people's condition in the South? Very hopeful, although at times I cannot help feeling anxious about their future. I was delighted with my visits to various institutions of learning, and surprised at the desire manifested among the young people to obtain an education. Where toil-worn mothers bent beneath their heavy burdens, their more favored daughters are enjoying the privileges of education. Young people are making recitations in Greek and Latin, where it was once a crime to teach their parents to read. I also became acquainted with colored professors and presidents of colleges, saw young ladies who had graduated as doctors. Comfortable homes have succeeded old cabins of slavery, vast crops have been raised by free labor. I read with interest and pleasure a number of papers edited by colored men. I saw it estimated that 2 millions of our people had learned to read, and I feel deeply grateful to the people who have supplied us with teachers who have stood their ground so nobly among our people. But, asked Mr. Forrest, you expressed fears about the future of our race. From whence do your fears arise? From the unfortunate conditions which slavery has entailed upon that section of our country. I dread the results of that racial feeling which ever and anon breaks out into restlessness and crime. Also, I am concerned about the lack of home training for those for whom the discipline of the plantation has been exchanged for the penalties of prisons and chain gangs. I am sorry to see numbers of our young men growing away from the influence of the church and drifting into prisons. I also fear that in some sections, as colored men increase in wealth and intelligence, there will be an increase of race rivalry and jealousy. It is said that savages, by putting their ears to the ground, can hear a far-off tread. So, today, I fear that there are savage elements in our civilization which hear the advancing tread of the Negro and would retard his coming. It is the incarnation of these elements that I dread. It is their elimination I do so earnestly desire. Whether it be outgrown or not is our unsolved problem. Time alone will tell whether or not the virus of slavery and injustice has too fully permeated our Southern civilization for a complete recovery. Nations honeycombed by vice have fallen beneath the weight of their iniquities. Justice is always uncompromising in its claims and inexorable in its demands. The laws of the universe are never repealed to accommodate our follies. Surely, said Bishop Tunster, the Negro has a higher mission than that of aimlessly drifting through life and patiently waiting for death. We may not, answered Reverend Carmichael, have the same dash, courage, and aggressiveness of other races, accustomed to struggle, achievement, and dominion, but surely the world needs something better than the results of arrogance, aggressiveness, and indomitable power. For the evils of society there are no solvents as potent as love and justice, and our greatest need is not more wealth and learning, but a religion replete with life and glowing with love. Let this be the impelling force in the race, and it cannot fail to rise in the scale of character and condition. And, said Dr. Latimer, instead of narrowing our sympathies to mere racial questions, let us broaden them to humanity's wider issues. Let us, replied Reverend Carmichael, pass it along the lines that to be willfully ignorant is to be shamefully criminal. Let us teach our people not to love pleasure or to fear death, but to learn the true value of life and to do their part to eliminate the paganism of caste from our holy religion and the lawlessness of savagery from our civilization. How did you enjoy the evening, Marie? Asked Robert as they walked homeward. I was interested and deeply pleased, answered Marie. I, said Robert, was thinking of the wonderful changes that have come to us since the war. When I sat in those well-lighted, beautifully furnished rooms, I was thinking of the meetings we used to have in bygone days, how we used to go by stealth into lonely woods and gloomy swamps to tell of our hopes and fears, sorrows and trials. I hope that we will have many more of these gatherings. Let us have the next one here. "I am sure," said Marie, "I would gladly welcome such a conference at any time. I think such meetings would be so helpful to our young people." End of Section 30. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Section 31 of Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, by Francis E. W. Harper. Chapter 31. Dawning Affections. "Doctor," said Iola, as they walked home from the conversazione, "I wish I could do something more for our people than I am doing. I taught in the South till failing health compelled me to change my employment. But now that I am well and strong, I would like to do something of lasting service for the race." "Why not," asked Dr. Latimer, "write a good, strong book which would be helpful to them? I think there is an amount of dormant talent among us and a large field from which to gather materials for such a book." "I would do it willingly if I could, but one needs both leisure and money to make a successful book. There is material among us for the broadest comedies and the deepest tragedies, but, besides money and leisure, it needs patience, perseverance, courage, and the hand of an artist to weave it into the literature of the country. Miss Leroy, you have a large and rich experience. You possess a vivid imagination and glowing fancy. Write, out of the fullness of your heart, a book to inspire men and women with a deeper sense of justice and humanity." "Doctor," replied Iola, "I would do it if I could, not for the money it might bring, but for the good it might do. But who believes any good can come out of the black Nazareth? Miss Leroy, out of the race must come its own thinkers and writers. Authors belonging to the white race have written good racial books, for which I am deeply grateful, but it seems to be almost impossible for a white man to put himself completely in our place. No man can feel the iron which enters another man's soul. Well, doctor, when I write a book I shall take you for the hero of my story." "Why, what have I done," asked Dr. Latimer, in a surprised tone, "that you should impale me on your pen?" "You have done nobly," answered Iola, "in refusing your grandmother's offer." "I only did my duty," he modestly replied. "But," said Iola, "when others are trying to slip out from the race and pass into the white basis, I cannot help admiring one who acts as if he felt that the weaker the race is, the closer he would cling to it." "My mother," replied Dr. Latimer, "faithful and true, belongs to that race. Where else should I be? But I know a young lady who could have cast her lot with the favored race, yet chose to take her place with the freed people as their teacher, friend, and adviser. This young lady was alone in the world. She had been fearfully wronged, and to her stricken heart came a brilliant offer of love, home, and social position. But she bound her heart to the mast of duty, closed her ears to the siren song, and could not be lured from her purpose." A startled look stole over Iola's face, and lifting her eyes to his, she faltered, "Do you know her?" "Yes, I know her and admire her, and she ought to be made the subject of a soul-inspiring story. Do you know of whom I speak?" "How should I, doctor? I am sure you have not made me your confidant," she responded demurely. Then she quickly turned and tripped up the steps of her home, which she had just reached. After this conversation, Dr. Latimer became a frequent visitor at Iola's home, and a firm friend of her brother. Harry was at that age when, for the young and inexperienced, vice puts on her fairest guise and most seductive smiles. Dr. Latimer's wider knowledge and larger experience made his friendship for Harry very valuable, and the service he rendered him made him a favorite and ever welcome guest in the family. "Are you all alone?" asked Robert one night as he entered the cozy little parlor where Iola sat reading. "Where are the rest of the folks?" "Mama and Grandma have gone to bed," answered Iola. "Harry and Lucille are at the concert. They are passionately fond of music, and find facilities here that they do not have in the South. They wouldn't go to hear a seraph where they must take a Negro's seat. I was too tired to go. Besides, two's company and three's a crowd," she added, significantly. "I reckon you struck the nail on the head that time," said Robert, laughing. "But you have not been alone all the time. Just as I reached the corner I saw Dr. Latimer leaving the door. I see he still continues his visits. Who is his patient now?" "Oh, Uncle Robert," said Iola, smiling and flushing. "He is out with Harry and Lucille part of the time, and drops in now and then to see us all." "Well," said Robert, "I suppose the case is now an affair of the heart. But I cannot blame him for it," he added, looking fondly on the beautiful face of his niece, which sorrow had touched only to chisel into more loveliness. "How do you like him?" "I must have within me," answered Iola, with unaffected truthfulness, "a large amount of hero worship. The characters of the Old Testament I most admire are Moses and Nehemiah. They were willing to put aside their own advantages for their race and country. Dr. Latimer comes up to my ideal of a high, heroic manhood." "I think," answered Robert, smiling archly, "he would be delighted to hear your opinion of him." "I tell him," continued Iola, "that he belongs to the days of chivalry, but he smiles and says he only belongs to the days of hardpan service." "Some one," said Robert, "was saying to day that he stood in his own light when he refused his grandmother's offer to receive him as her son." "I think," said Iola, "it was the grandest hour of his life when he made that decision. I have admired him ever since I heard his story." "But, Iola, think of the advantages he set aside. It was no sacrifice for me to remain colored, with my lack of education and race sympathies, but Dr. Latimer had doors open to him as a white man which are forever closed to a colored man. To be born white in this country is to be born to an inheritance of privileges, to hold in your hands the keys that open before you the doors of every occupation, advantage, opportunity, and achievement." "I know that, uncle," answered Iola, "but even these advantages are too dearly bought if they mean loss of honor, true manliness, and self-respect. He could not have retained these had he ignored his mother and lived under a veil of concealment, constantly haunted by a dread of detection. The gain would not have been worth the cost. It were better that he should walk the ruggedest paths of life a true man than tread the softest carpets a moral cripple." "I am afraid," said Robert, laying his hand caressingly upon her head, "that we are destined to lose the light of our home." "Oh, uncle, how you talk! I never dreamed of what you are thinking," answered Iola, half reproachfully. "And how," asked Robert, "do you know what I am thinking about?" "My dear uncle, I am not blind." "Neither am I," replied Robert, significantly, as he left the room. Iola's admiration for Dr. Latimer was not a one-sided affair. Day after day she was filling a larger place in his heart. The touch of her hand thrilled him with emotion. Her lightest words were an entrancing melody to his ear. Her noblest sentiments found a response in his heart. In their desire to help the race their hearts beat in loving unison. One grand and noble purpose was giving tone and color to their lives and strengthening the bonds of affection between them. End of Section 31. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Section 32 of Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, by Francis E. W. Harper. Chapter 32. Wooing and Wedding. Harry's vacation had been very pleasant. Miss Delany, with her fine conversational powers and ready wit, had added much to his enjoyment. Robert had given his mother the pleasantest room in the house, and in the evening the family would gather around her, tell her the news of the day, read to her from the Bible, join with her in thanksgiving for mercies received and in prayer for protection through the night. Harry was very grateful to Dr. Latimer for the kindly interest he had shown in accompanying Miss Delany and himself to places of interest and amusement. He was grateful, too, that in the city of P doors were open to them which were barred against them in the South. The bright, beautiful days of summer were gliding into autumn with its glorious wealth of foliage, and the time was approaching for the departure of Harry and Miss Delany to their respective schools, when Dr. Latimer received several letters from North Carolina urging him to come South, as physicians were greatly needed there. Although his practice was lucrative in the city of P, he resolved he would go where his services were most needed. A few evenings before he started, he called at the house and made an engagement to drive Iola to the park. At the time appointed, he drove up to the door in his fine equipage. Iola stepped gracefully in and sat quietly by his side to enjoy the loveliness of the scenery and the gorgeous grandeur of the setting sun. "I expect to go South," said Dr. Latimer as he drove slowly along. "Ah, indeed," said Iola, assuming an air of interest, while a shadow flitted over her face. "Where do you expect to pitch your tent?" "In the city of C, North Carolina," he answered. "Oh, I wish," she exclaimed, "that you were going to Georgia, where you could take care of that high-spirited brother of mine." "I suppose if he were to hear you he would laugh and say that he could take care of himself, but I know a better plan than that." "What is it?" asked Iola, innocently. "That you will commit yourself, instead of your brother, to my care." "Oh, dear," replied Iola, drawing a long breath, "what would mamma say?" "That she would willingly resign you, I hope." "And what would grandma and Uncle Robert say?" again asked Iola. "That they would cheerfully acquiesce. Now, what would I say if they all consent?" "I don't know," modestly responded Iola. "Well," replied Dr. Latimer, "I would say, 'Could deeds my love discover, could valor gain thy charms, to prove myself thy lover, I'd face a world in arms.'" "And prove a good soldier," added Iola, smiling, "when there is no battle to fight." "Iola, I am in earnest," said Dr. Latimer, passionately. "In the work to which I am devoted, every burden will be lighter, every path smoother, if brightened and blessed with your companionship." A sober expression swept over Iola's face, and dropping her eyes, she said, "I must have time to think." Quietly they rode along the river bank until Dr. Latimer broke the silence by saying, "Miss Iola, I think that you brood too much over the condition of our people." "Perhaps I do," she replied, "but they never burn a man in the South that they do not kindle a fire around my soul." "I am afraid," replied Dr. Latimer, "that you will grow morbid and nervous. Most of our people take life easily. Why shouldn't you?" "Because," she answered, "I can see breakers ahead which they do not." "Oh, give yourself no uneasiness. They will catch the fret and fever of the 19th century soon enough. I have heard several of our ministers say that it is chiefly men of disreputable characters who are made the subjects of violence and lynch law." "Suppose it is so," responded Iola, feelingly. "If these men believe in eternal punishment, they ought to feel a greater concern for the wretched sinner who was hurried out of time with all his sins upon his head than for the godly man who passes through violence to endless rest." "That is true, and I am not counseling you to be selfish. But, Miss Iola, had you not better look out for yourself?" "Thank you, doctor, I am feeling quite well." "I know it, but your devotion to study and work is too intense," he replied. "I am preparing to teach, and must spend my leisure time in study. Mr. Cloten is an excellent employer, and treats his employees as if they had hearts as well as hands. But to be an expert accountant is not the best use to which I can put my life." "As a teacher you will need strong health and calm nerves. You had better let me prescribe for you. You need," he added with a merry twinkle in his eyes, "change of air, change of scene, and change of name." "Well, doctor," said Iola, laughing, "that is the newest nostrum out. Had you not better apply for a patent?" "Oh," replied Dr. Latimer, with affected gravity, "you know you must have unlimited faith in your physician." "So you wish me to try the faith cure?" asked Iola, laughing. "Yes, faith in me," responded Dr. Latimer, seriously. "Oh, here we are at home!" exclaimed Iola. "This has been a glorious evening, doctor. I am indebted to you for a great pleasure. I am extremely grateful." "You are perfectly welcome," replied Dr. Latimer. "The pleasure has been mutual, I assure you." "Will you not come in?" asked Iola. Tying his horse, he accompanied Iola into the parlor. Seating himself near her, he poured into her ears words eloquent with love and tenderness. "Iola," he said, "I am not an adept in courtly phrases. I am a plain man, who believes in love and truth. In asking you to share my lot, I am not inviting you to a life of ease and luxury, for year after year I may have to struggle to keep the wolf from the door. But your presence would make my home one of the brightest spots on earth and one of the fairest types of heaven. Am I presumptuous in hoping that your love will become the crowning joy of my life?" His words were more than a tender strain wooing her to love and happiness. They were a clarion call to a life of high and holy worth, a call which found a response in her heart. Her hand lay limp in his. She did not withdraw it, but, raising her lustrous eyes to his, she softly answered, "Frank, I love you." After he had gone, Iola sat by the window gazing at the splendid stars, her heart quietly throbbing with a delicious sense of joy and love. She had admired Dr. Gresham, and had there been no barrier in her way she might have learned to love him. But Dr. Latimer had grown irresistibly upon her heart. There were depths in her nature that Dr. Gresham had never fathomed, aspirations in her soul with which he had never mingled. But as the waves leap up to the strand, so her soul went out to Dr. Latimer. Between their lives were no impeding barriers, no inclination impelling one way and duty compelling another. Kindred hopes and tastes had knit their hearts, grand and noble purposes were lighting up their lives, and they esteemed it a blessed privilege to stand on the threshold of a new era and labor for those who had passed from the old oligarchy of slavery into the new commonwealth of freedom. On the next evening Dr. Latimer rang the bell and was answered by Harry, who ushered him into the parlor and then came back to the sitting room, saying, "Iola, Dr. Latimer has called to see you." "Has he?" answered Iola, a glad light coming into her eyes. "Come, Lucille, let us go into the parlor." "Oh, no," interposed Harry, shrugging his shoulders and catching Lucille's hand. "He didn't ask for you. When we went to the concert we were told three's a crowd, and I say one good turn deserves another." "Oh, Harry, you are so full of nonsense. Let Lucille go," said Iola. "Indeed I will not. I want to have a good time as well as you," said Harry. "Oh, you're the most nonsensical man I know," interposed Miss Delany. Yet she stayed with Harry. "You're looking very bright and happy," said Dr. Latimer to Iola as she entered. "My ride in the park was so refreshing. I enjoyed it so much. The day was so lovely, the air delicious, the birds sang so sweetly, and the sunset was so magnificent." "I am glad of it. Why, Iola, your home is so happy, your heart should be as light as a schoolgirl's." "Doctor," she replied, "I must be prematurely old. I have scarcely known what it is to be light-hearted since my father's death." "I know it, darling," he answered, seating himself beside her and drawing her to him. "You have been tried in the fire, but are you not better for the crucial test?" "Doctor," she replied, "as we rode along yesterday, mingling with the sunshine of the present came the shadows of the past. I was thinking of the bright, joyous days of my girlhood when I defended slavery, and of how the cup that I would have pressed to the lips of others was forced to my own. Yet in looking over the mournful past, I would not change the Iola of then for the Iola of now." "Yes," responded Dr. Latimer, musingly, "darkness shows us worlds of light we never saw by day. Oh, doctor, you cannot conceive what it must have been to be hurled from a home of love and light into the dark abyss of slavery. To be compelled to take your place among a people you have learned to look upon as inferiors and social outcasts. To be in the power of men whose presence would fill you with horror and loathing, and to know that there is no earthly power to protect you from the highest insults which brutal cowardice could shower upon you. I am so glad that no other woman of my race will suffer as I have done." The flush deepened on her face. A mournful splendor beamed from her beautiful eyes, into which the tears had slowly gathered. "Darling," he said, his voice vibrating with mingled feelings of tenderness and resentment, "you must forget the sad past. You are like a tender lamb snatched from the jaws of a hungry wolf, but who still needs protecting, loving care. But it must have been terrible," he added in a painful tone. "It was indeed. For a while I was like one dazed. I tried to pray, but the heavens seemed brass over my head. I was wild with agony, and had I not been placed under conditions which roused all the resistance of my soul, I would have lost my reason. Was it not a mistake to have kept you ignorant of your colored blood? It was the great mistake of my father's life, but dear papa knew something of the cruel, crushing power of caste, and he tried to shield us from it." "Yes, yes," replied Dr. Latimer, thoughtfully. "In trying to shield you from pain, he plunged you into deeper suffering." "I never blame him, because I know he did it for the best. Had he lived, he would have taken us to France, where I should have had a life of careless ease and pleasure. But now my life has a much grander significance than it would have had under such conditions. Fearful as the awakening was, it was better than to have slept through life." "Best for you and best for me," said Dr. Latimer. "There are souls that never awaken, but if they miss the deepest pain, they also lose the highest joy." Dr. Latimer went South after his engagement, and through his medical skill and agreeable manners became very successful in his practice. In the following summer he built a cozy home for the reception of his bride, and came North, where, with Harry and Miss Delany as attendants, he was married to Iola, amid a pleasant gathering of friends, by Reverend Carmichael. End of Section 32. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Section 33 of Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, by Francis E. W. Harper. Chapter 33. Conclusion and Note. It was late in the summer when Dr. Latimer and his bride reached their home in North Carolina. Over the cottage porch were morning glories to greet the first flushes of the rising day, and roses and jasmines to distill their fragrance on the evening air. Aunt Linda, who had been apprised of their coming, was patiently awaiting their arrival, and Uncle Daniel was pleased to know that "dat sweet young lady who had sich pretty manners war comin' to live wid 'em." As soon as they arrived, Aunt Linda rushed up to Iola, folded her in her arms, and joyfully exclaimed, "Howdy, honey! I'se so glad you's come. I seed it in a vision dat somebody fair war comin' to help us, an' when I yered it war you, I laughed an' jes' rolled ober, an' laughed an' jes' give up." "But, Aunt Linda, I'm not very fair," replied Mrs. Latimer. "Well, chile, you's fair to me. How's all your folks in de up country?" "All well. I expect them down soon to live here." "What, Harriet and Robbie and your ma? Oh, that is too good. I allers said Robbie had sand in his craw, and war born for good luck. He war a mighty nice boy. Harriet's in clover now. Well, ebery dog has its day, and the cat has Sunday. I allers tole Harriet to keep a stiff upper lip, that it war a long road that had no turn." Dr. Latimer was much gratified by the tender care Aunt Linda bestowed on Iola. "I ain't gwine to let her do nuffin till she gets seasoned. She looks as sweet as a peach. I alluz wanted some nice lady to come down yer and learn our gals some sense. I can't read myself, but I likes to year them that can." "Well, Aunt Linda, I am going to teach in the Sunday school, help in the church, hold mothers' meetings to help these boys and girls to grow up to be good men and women. Won't you get a pair of spectacles and learn to read?" "Oh, you can't get dat book through my head. No way you can fix it. I knows 'nuff to get to heaven, and that's all I wants to know." Aunt Linda was kind and obliging, but there was one place where she drew the line, and that was at learning to read. Harry and Miss Delany accompanied Iola as far as her new home, and remained several days. The evening before their departure, Harry took Miss Delany a drive of several miles through the pine barrens. "This thing is getting very monotonous," Harry broke out, when they had gone some distance. "Oh, I enjoy it," replied Miss Delany. "These stately pines look so grand and solemn, they remind me of a procession of hooded monks." "What in the world are you talking about, Lucille?" asked Harry, looking puzzled. "About those pine trees," replied Miss Delany in a tone of surprise. "Pshaw! I wasn't thinking about them. I'm thinking about Iola and Frank." "What about them?" asked Lucille. "Why, when I was in P, Dr. Latimer used to be first-rate company. But now it is nothing but what Iola wants, and what Iola says, and what Iola likes. I don't believe that there is a subject I could name to him, from spinning a top to circumnavigating the globe, that he wouldn't somehow contrive to bring Iola in. And I don't believe you could talk 10 minutes to Iola on any subject, from dressing a doll to the latest discovery in science, that she wouldn't manage to lug in Frank." "Oh, you absurd creature," responded Lucille. "This is their honeymoon, and they are deeply in love with each other. Wait till you get in love with some one." "I am in love now," replied Harry with a serious air. "With whom?" asked Lucille archly. "With you," answered Harry, trying to take her hand. "Oh, Harry," she exclaimed, playfully resisting, "don't be so nonsensical." "Don't you think the bride looked lovely with that dress of spotless white, and with those orange blossoms in her hair?" "Yes, she did, that's a fact," responded Harry. "But, Lucille, I think there is a great deal of misplaced sentiment at weddings," he added more seriously. "How so?" "Oh, here are a couple just married, and who are as happy can be, and people will crowd around them wishing much joy, but who thinks of wishing joy to the forlorn old bachelors and restless old maids?" "Well, Harry, if you want people to wish you much happiness, why don't you do as the doctor has done? Get yourself a wife." "I will," he replied soberly, "when you say so." "Oh, Harry, don't be so absurd." "Indeed, there isn't a bit of absurdity about what I say. I am in earnest." There was something in the expression of Harry's face and the tone of his voice which arrested the banter on Lucille's lips. "I think it was Charles Lamb," replied Lucille, "who once said that school teachers are uncomfortable people, and, Harry, I would not like to make you uncomfortable by marrying you." "You will make me uncomfortable by not marrying me." "But," replied Lucille, "your mother may not prefer me for a daughter. You know, Harry, complexional prejudices are not confined to white people." "My mother," replied Harry, with an air of confidence, "is too noble to indulge in such sentiments." "And Iola, would she be satisfied?" "Why, it would add to her satisfaction. She is not one who can't be white and won't be black." "Well, then," replied Lucille, "I will take the question of your comfort into consideration." The above promise was thoughtfully remembered by Lucille till a bridal ring and happy marriage were the result. Soon after Iola had settled in C, she quietly took her place in the Sunday school as a teacher, and in the church as a helper. She was welcomed by the young pastor, who found in her a strong and faithful ally. Together they planned meetings for the especial benefit of mothers and children. When the dens of vice are spreading their snares for the feet of the tempted and inexperienced, her doors are freely opened for the instruction of the children before their feet have wandered and gone far astray. She has no carpets too fine for the tread of their little feet. She thinks it is better to have stains on her carpet than stains on their souls through any neglect of hers. In lowly homes and windowless cabins her visits are always welcome. Little children love her. Old age turns to her for comfort, young girls for guidance, and mothers for counsel. Her life is full of blessedness. Dr. Latimer, by his kindness and skill, has won the name of the Good Doctor. But he is more than a successful doctor. He is a true patriot and a good citizen. Honest, just, and discriminating, he endeavors to precept and example to instill into the minds of others sentiments of good citizenship. He is a leader in every reform movement for the benefit of the community. But his patriotism is not confined to race lines. The world is his country, and mankind his countrymen. While he abhors their deeds of violence, he pities the short-sighted and besotted men who seem madly intent upon laying magazines of powder under the cradles of unborn generations. He has great faith in the possibilities of the Negro, and believes that, enlightened and Christianized, he will sink the old animosities of slavery into the new community of interests arising from freedom, and that his influence upon the South will be as the influence of the sun upon the earth. As when the sun passes from Capricorn to Cancer, beauty, greenness, and harmony spring up in his path, so he hopes that the future career of the Negro will be a greater influence for freedom and social advancement than it was in the days of yore for slavery and its inferior civilization. Harry and Lucille are at the head of a large and flourishing school. Lucille gives her ripening experience to her chosen work, to which she was too devoted to resign. And through the school they are lifting up the homes of the people. Some have pitied, others blamed, Harry for casting his lot with the colored people, but he knows that life's highest and best advantages do not depend on the color of the skin or texture of the hair. He has his reward in the improved condition of his pupils and the superb manhood and noble life which he has developed in his much-needed work. Uncle Daniel still lingers on the shores of time, a cheery, lovable old man, loved and respected by all, a welcome guest in every home. Soon after Iola's marriage, Robert sold out his business and moved with his mother and sister to North Carolina. He bought a large plantation near C, which he divided into small homesteads, and sold to poor but thrifty laborers, and his heart has been gladdened by their increased prosperity and progress. He has seen the one-roomed cabins changed to comfortable cottages in which cleanliness and order have supplanted the prolific causes of disease and death. Kind and generous, he often remembers Mrs. Johnson and sends her timely aid. Marie's pale, spiritual face still bears traces of the beauty which was her youthful dower, but its bloom has been succeeded by an air of sweetness and dignity. Though frail in health, she is always ready to lend a helping hand wherever and whenever she can. Grandmother Johnson was glad to return South and spend the remnant of her days with the remaining friends of her early life. Although feeble, she is in full sympathy with her children for the uplifting of the race. Marie and her mother are enjoying their aftermath of life, one by rendering to others all the service in her power, while the other, with her face turned toward the celestial city, is only waiting till the angels open wide the mystic gate. The shadows have been lifted from all their lives, and peace, like bright dew, has descended upon their paths. Blessed themselves, their lives are a blessing to others. Note: from threads of fact and fiction I have woven a story whose mission will not be in vain if it awaken in the hearts of our countrymen a stronger sense of justice and a more Christ-like humanity in behalf of those whom the fortunes of war threw, homeless, ignorant, and poor, upon the threshold of a new era. Nor will it be in vain if it inspire the children of those upon whose brows God has poured the chrism of that new era to determine that they will embrace every opportunity, develop every faculty, and use every power God has given them to rise in the scale of character and condition, and to add their quota of good citizenship to the best welfare of the nation. There are scattered among us materials for mournful tragedies and mirth-provoking comedies, which some hand may yet bring into the literature of the country, glowing with the fervor of the tropics and enriched by the luxuriance of the Orient, and thus add to the solution of our unsolved American problem. The race has not had very long to straighten its hands from the hoe, to grasp the pen and wield it as a power for good, and to erect above the ruined auction block and slave pen institutions of learning. But there is light beyond the darkness, joy beyond the present pain. There is hope in God's great justice and the Negro's rising brain. Though the morning seems to linger o'er the hilltops far away, yet the shadows bear the promise of a brighter coming day. End of Section 33. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. End of Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, by Francis E. W. Harper.